Miniature Market has thousands of board games at discounted prices. Click the direct link below to see all of those discounted games. Hello my friends, back in 2017, Ethnos came out and it took the world by storm. It was a little known game that got a lot of buzz. It came out from CMON originally here in the US. And the game was an amazing game, but it went out of print right away. It sold out. They did some more first printings and like first editions of that print. They sold out as well. Well, then it went out of commission for a while. Well, in 2023, they came out with Arco Society, which was a completely reworking of this game, which changed it from area control to moving up Euro tracks. And I gave that game a pretty negative review, and so did many of the people that, hey, this is not what everyone was asking for the last 6 years. We wanted the first edition with better art and things like that, or different art. And now we have 2025, a new version, a second edition, which uses basically the main mechanisms of the first edition. No more of those boring tracks on Arco Society. But now, is it worthy to get? If you don't have Ethnos, which one should you get? If you have the first edition, is second edition better? Let's take a look. If you have not seen my original video on Ethnos and you don't know how it's played, you can go on my channel and see that. All right, so we have the first edition on the left and the second edition on the right. As you can clearly tell, very different. So the second edition is a lot smaller, the box, and the art is a lot more poppy, vibrant, bright, where the one on the left is sort of more of a darker fantasy, muted tones and such. Now, one of the biggest issues I had with the first edition was how just bland the board looked. It just looks, nothing special, doesn't pop, it looks boring. That was my biggest complaint to the first edition, is I hated the board. I know many other people did too. The other second edition board, you can see right below it, it's a lot bigger, but again, also sticking with that vibrant work where it really stands out. And I like that. They even have some of the scoring on the board as well to help, but it is a lot more vibrant. So definitely an improvement, in my opinion, of the board. Now, speaking of the tokens that go in here for the different ages, they changed the distribution of how much things score or could score. Here we're looking at first edition, and you'll notice that there are some zeros on the left, some twos, and it goes to a max of 10 if you're playing with the smaller player counts. And this has a pretty wide standard deviation. Now, if we look at the newer ones, the lowest they go are 4s, but it has one that goes up to 12. Now, if you take the average of these on sort of the smaller player counts, the average is 7 for second edition, 5 for first edition. So you actually score less points for area control in the first edition. But by having the wider standard deviation, it made it so that the areas were more interesting because of the way things would come out. They weren't just all okay. They were some that were like clearly better than others and some that really were not good, and it just made things more interesting. Now, speaking of the tokens or components that you'd placed for the area control on the maps, the left side here is for the first edition, there are these little discs, and the right side is the second edition, so little pagodas there. Obviously, the second edition, in my opinion, looks way cooler on the table, and they stack and they look even cooler, so I like second edition better. So let's take a look at the cards. Here's one faction from the first edition. You can get a feel for the art, so, and a couple of big things here. Number one is you have the same image for that faction, regardless of which area it's for on the map. Plus, what it does is very clear right there. It's written there. It's easy to see. It doesn't take much for a new person to see that. Also, the cards themselves are pretty decent quality. They're not like super thick. They're not linen finish, but they're playable. They're fine. They're not great, but they're not bad either. Now, here's the cards for the second edition. They're very different artwork. Obviously, I like the vibrance of this, but this is like the raccoon faction. Now, you know that because the icon in the upper left shows a raccoon, but if you're just looking at the cards down, there's a different piece of art for those, and I get that most people like it when there's more artwork in a game. If this was all the same art, people would complain, and sometimes I do in other games, it's like, I'd rather have more art than just the same thing over and over. Here they did it different. They probably listened to some people. I don't like it as much, because as the cards are out there, it's hard to tell which, like just by looking at it, you're looking at the icon, not the image. Also, a huge thing is no text, it's only icons, which means it's a little bit harder. Everyone has a player aid, but it's not as conducive to really quickly seeing what this card does. Now, also keep in mind, remember, faction name, Winged Folk in the first edition, or Centaur, or Giant. It's very clear which faction this is. You just read it, it's fine, and this draws you in because you're looking at the picture, you're reading the text. This does not draw you in. In fact, all you're looking at here are this icon and this color, because that's the color area it's for. The images, you almost just don't even look at them because they're different for the same faction. So you're not even really gonna be able to tell what it is by looking at the image because they're so different, even though it's the same faction. And you're not really gonna care too much about the icon. So, eesh. Last thing, this is a huge thing. This is probably my biggest problem with second edition. These cards, now they do have a linen finish on there. However, the cards are thin. They bend very easily. They're thinner than the other ones. And this is a big issue because this is a card game. You're playing, holding, shuffling cards a lot in this game. And this, I can't believe they went with this thin of a card. Now, I do know that sometimes if you take a card and you stamp it with the thin finish, it actually ends up getting thinner, feeling thinner, and without you really knowing it's gonna get thinner. Cleopatra Society of Architects, when they did their big Kickstarter, had the same issue where they took a card and they stamped it with linen finish. It actually made them worse because you should only linen finish cards that are thick enough to be linen finish. These do not feel good. Now, most of the factions are the same, or they do the same things as the first edition, but there are some differences. Number one, the Giants from the original one are now the Bears. They used to give you 2 or 5 points respectively for a certain player count. Now they're giving you them for 4 or 10, so they're increasing the count here. You're getting more points for doing this. I'll talk more about this later, but that's a difference. Now there is one new faction. They got rid of the halflings, which were you don't place, you know, a marker on the board, but count as 2 cards for party scoring. Where now the raccoons. Now earlier I was referencing these. I thought this was raccoon. This is actually the red panda. Again, this looks like a raccoon, but it's not. It's a red panda. Anyways, these are raccoons. More issues with graphic design, in my opinion. But here, they've replaced them with these, which essentially give you coins and making each of the areas in the area control worth more as the game goes on. I actually like that change. Now, the merfolk are now the koi. So they've worked very similarly, except they've changed the points. Many of the bonus parts actually are the same, but you score actually more points from this board than you did in the original version for the similar player counts. I don't like this change because the first edition wins more points. Well, I mean, this has more points. It further dilutes the area control on the map because it's almost just as good to kind of like score the points on here as opposed to fighting other people on the map. So it makes the game a little bit less confrontational, which is what really makes this game what it is. Okay, there used to be orcs, and now they're the monkeys. Now they work similarly. However, you actually get less points from pulling off a certain amount during an age than you used to. And I think the reason they did that is because the area control points, as I showed you earlier, are actually a little bit stronger in the second edition. So to balance that, they did this. So, you know, in this case, area control becomes a little bit more important. So because the scoring went up for the area control, even though it has a less standard deviation, less interesting, they had to balance this for this. So this is like, they did this to balance the other thing, which I don't like as much. But if you didn't, then it would be unbalanced and that wouldn't be good either. So this is sort of a wash. Now the first edition had trolls. They work the same now as what the foxes would, except these now, the tiebreakers, actually work for the koi board in addition to the area control. So I actually like that change better, but you could easily just use that rule first edition. There's also an optional rule in second edition for recruitment mode. Whenever the ally pool has less than 3 cards, you can reveal it till there's 3 there. I like this idea. It works well, and you could use this in first edition as well. But also there's a solo mode in this version. I have not played it, but it's there. That was not in the original edition. Okay, again, this is just a comparison. If you want to see more about how to play Ethnos, then you can see my previous video about that on my channel. So let's talk about a few different things here. Let's first talk about art. This is going to be a very polarizing aspect. You're either going to love or hate one or two or both of them, or it's going to be very personal. For me, I like the cover of the second edition better. It's vibrant, it pops, it stands off the shelf, and it really looks, for me, a lot better. I know a lot of people don't like the anthropomorphic animals that sort of started to become really popular around when Libertalia was redone with those, but I also saw the amount of pushback that people gave of that. I tend to like the animals. I like it, and the vibrancy of that, to me, I like that better than the dull, muted tones of the original. Now, the board itself, this was my most hated thing about the first edition, how boring and bland that board looked. It just looked so boring on the table. Second edition board completely fixes that. It looks nice, vibrant. Sure, it takes up more table space, which might be a little bit of an issue for some people, but it also has some of the scoring on there, and it just looks a lot better. I do kind of wish they made it a little smaller, but beggars can't be choosers. I like that board a lot better. Cards. The art on the cards. Let's just talk about just art, not graphic design yet. The art, obviously, just like the cover, much more vibrant, and it just looks nicer. Now, the artwork on the first cards, first edition, I didn't dislike those. I liked them. In fact, I like how more sort of distinct they are, where each of the factions have one picture, and when you look at it on the table, you can go, oh, I get it. That's the wing folk there. Where you're not like, huh. Depending on the color that this card is or the area that's going to, it's a different image, and I'm not really sure what faction this is. So I like the art on the second one better, but let's talk more about functionality. I didn't dislike the first art, so for me, it's almost a tie there. Now, playability. This is a big thing. First edition had text on the cards, and again, as I just mentioned you, has a big image that's the same regardless of the faction, regardless of which area that's for. For playability, it was huge, and it really drew you into the game. It draws you in. You're looking at the cards on the table. You can quickly see which faction they're from just by looking at their images. It has the name there, and you're just looking at the color around it for where it's going. This one takes you out of the game and out of the theme because, as I just mentioned, every area for the same faction that could possibly be going into is a different piece of art, and it's confusing. You're looking at all these cards on the table, and you can't just look at the art and go, oh, I know what faction that is. You've got to look at the icon in the upper left, and you're looking at the color band on the left. So really, all you're doing the entire game is looking at an icon in the upper left and the color in the left bar. You're not even looking at the artwork anymore because it doesn't do you any good. You don't even look at it to see what it is. It's not functional at all. If they were all the same piece of art for each area, I think it would have been easier. But the first one, I felt like the first one was the factions were more distinct. You could look at them and tell them apart differently. Here, you can't even, they look so different between the faction, and then from faction to faction, they look different. I don't like it. One of the very rare times where I would say less pieces of art is better. Usually we ask for more. In this case, it hurt playability a lot for the second edition. Another thing is the black band on the region of the card is for the purple area on the board. They should have made that purple, or they should have darkened the part on the board. Lots of playability issues for this second one. That's one of the biggest issues I have, is it pulls you out of the theme and out of the game as you're just looking at icons, and it doesn't feel as immersive. And not that this is a thematic game, but it does pull you out of it instead of drawing you in like first edition does. Components. Here's my other biggest thing, other than what I just mentioned, which is pulling you out because just looking at icons. The components, the cards. This is a card game, folks. You're holding these cards, you're playing these cards, you're shuffling these cards 3 times a game. The cards in second edition are so much thinner. They probably aren't actually thinner, they just feel thinner and they bend easily. And I mentioned in the overview that I showed you that this also happened with a very popular Kickstarter for Cleopatra Society of Architects. They had this huge, luxurious, ridiculous production, and they overlooked the cards and how they felt. And I talked to the publisher when this happened because I got a lot of pushback. They said, yeah, we did linen finish. We thought it was just a great option. We thought it would make it better quality. But when you linen finish a card that's not thick enough really to handle it, it actually stamps it on the card and it makes it feel thinner. That's what happened here. I don't think the card itself is actually thinner. I think it's probably about the same cardstock, but when you put the linen finish on it, it makes it feel thinner. I do not like the way these cards feel. I feel like they bend very easily. You're going to need to sleeve these cards with the high quality sleeves to have them not feel like they're bending. I don't like sleeve cards because I don't like the way they shuffle. Other people are going to sleeve them anyway, and they're going to be like, this doesn't bother me. This was a huge thing for me. Now, the components. Now, when you look at the control markers, the pagodas versus the little discs, as I showed you, second edition wins that one. Gameplay. Let's talk about this. Few little differences here. The area control in the first edition, the points changed. And as I showed you there, the points in the second edition, if you look at just the averages of the lower player counts, it's 7 points per token. Where in the first edition, it's 5 points. So you're getting more points for it, but the devil's in the details. If you look at the standard deviation of the numbers, there's a wider distribution because you have the zeros and the twos in first edition. What that does is it makes things more interesting for the area control in first edition, because with the way that those happen, you're going to have areas that clearly aren't as good as other areas. So you're like, how is that better? Because it forces you to really fight hard over some other areas, as opposed to just being like, I can sprinkle some here, sprinkle some there. They're all about the same by the end. No, this is like, that area sucks. This area is great. All these other areas are pretty good. These two are horrible. Stay away from them. Shrinks the board, makes it more contiguous. and it makes it more tense. I don't like the new quote unquote rebalancing. I think it makes the game more sterile. I think it makes it less confrontational. I think it takes some of the fun out of the first edition. Makes it now it's basically less tactical in that way. That's the other bigger thing here. From the factions, again, most of them are the same. The Giants are now worth 4 points. We're worth 4 points versus 2 points. So the Giants were worth 2 points. Say the Bears are worth 4. So the second edition has more points. And again, I think it's because the points of the area control went up, so they had to also up that to help balance it. So it is what it is. They had to do what they had to do because they changed other things. So it's balanced for what the second edition is, which I don't like the scoring as much. The halflings were removed in the favors of the raccoons. This is a good change. It takes there's no control marker, but it counts as 2 cards for the party scoring. They took that out, which is kind of boring. It's like, oh, I get more points when I have a bigger band. Big deal. The raccoons makes regions more important, and that is a big deal. That is more fun because now that makes it a more bloodbathy area control game as opposed to just getting points somewhere else. So I like this second. This is one of the few areas in the mechanics or rebalancing that I liked better. And so it's interesting because the second edition, even more reason to use the older scoring token if you're going to bump it up. Some of these changes I just don't understand. The merfolk is now the koi, but at the end of age, the points are more. You're getting 1, 2, or 4 first edition to 4, 8, and 10. Again, this is a necessary change because they bumped up the per token average on the area control, so they also had to bump up some of the scoring on the boards to even things out. So it kind of dilutes the area control a little bit. Again, I'm not in love with this change, but they had to do it because they messed with the balancing of the area control, which I'm not a fan of. The orcs are basically the monkeys, but the monkeys are less points in the second edition, and that makes area control, essentially more important, which I do like. So I like that change there. The trolls are basically the same as the foxes, and in the second edition, the foxes are basically they're tiebreakers for not just the areas, but also for the koi. I like this change mechanically. This is a good change. No reason why you can't play with this change in the first edition. It's just a rule change. Recruitment mode, cool thing to always have at least 3 cards there. I like this change in second edition, but again, you could play with this rule in the first edition, no big deal. Solo mode, I didn't play it solo. I know tons of people like to play things solo. Second edition has a solo mode that has specific cards. First edition does not. If you're a solo player, you'll probably like that aspect of it. So in the end, which one do I like better? If you have the first edition, do you need second edition? If you don't have either, should you pay through the nose for first edition or should you get second edition? It's gonna be a very personal thing. I hit on what I liked and did not like about this. You might feel differently about those things. You might have liked it maybe toned down a little bit with the area control and like more Euro style in the board thing. I like the confrontation. So I still like first edition better. Now, if I had a wish, I'm basically going to Frankenstein this. If I had a wish, I would really love to play with the Arcos Society cards because I love that art, but then play it with the first edition points with the second edition sort of components and boards. Components meaning the stackable pagodas. So I kind of want to Frankenstein everything together. Can't do that because there's not enough factions in Arcos Society that don't have to do with the dumb tracks that they added to that game. So my Frankenstein is going to be, I think I'm going to play first edition using the second edition board and the second edition pagodas, and that's it. I think that's it. It's sad because this is way better than Arcos Society, but I think there's some real playability issues, the card issues, and pulling you out of the theme just looking at icons. Those 3 things makes me think first edition is better. Is it worth twice the price that it's going for in the secondary market? Probably not, but that's up to you. This has been the Game Boy Geek, breaking down barriers, growing relationships with board games, and helping you find the next one you love. Game Toppers upgrades every game you play, and they just launched their 4.5 Kickstarter, which will introduce the new Galactic, Mycroft, and Watson Game Toppers with interchangeable rail inlays, as well as new game mats, miniature gaming terrain packs, leg kit options, dining covers, accessories, and amazing package deals. Search for Game Toppers on Kickstarter or go to GameToppersLLC.com.